So in this first video, I would like to talk about the importance of the center. The center is one of the keystones of developing your game. I would like to show you an example of one of my students where the importance of the center has been highlighted, and also from both perspectives. So when you're playing with a nice pawn center or how to play against the pawn center. I believe that is very important because once you are neglecting the importance of a pawn center, you're allowing your opponent to take over the initiative. That's what we are going to see in this first example, but we will see it also in the rest of the video series and as well as in the interactive section. So let's start with a game of a student of mine, Eline Roebers, playing in the Béthune tournament in France around Christmas time. She's playing with the white pieces e4, c6 and d4. So okay, this is a Caro-Kann opening, and everybody knows that the move played in the game d5 is a key move here for black, just to counter the center. This is a general spirit, not only in the Caro-Kann but in many openings. If you take the French, it is the same. Instead of the pawn on c6, you have the pawn on e6, but the next move is d5 in order just to gain more grip in the center, to establish squares for your pieces. Let me just point out that if you don't make such a move, you just ignore the center, you make a pawn, let's say, on the side of the board, you're not posing any questions to white, you're not generating new squares for your pieces, and you're allowing your opponent just to get a free development, to do whatever he wants, and once all your pieces are nicely developed, you can just build up an attack. So here, very important to understand what you're doing with every move you're playing. With the move d5, you're trying to get a pawn in the center. This pawn enables your other pieces to develop, but it also prevents your opponent's pieces to go to certain squares. That's very important to realize. Of course, there are many options here, but I like to point out the game as Eline went for this move f3. Of course, the move f3 is a bit of a sideline. There are other lines which are more popular. For instance, you can just develop with knight c3 is a good move. You can also play e5. You can play e takes d5. All very sensible options. The move played f3 is considered to be a sideline because you're not really developing a piece. For instance, also you take away the developing square from the knight. But of course it's not so bad. It has been seen on in many high-profile games. I'd like to discuss with you what is happening in the next stage, because black has a lot of options at his disposal. Also, a move like queen b6 may look a little bit silly to get your queen out, but you try to punish white for weakening the king side, especially this diagonal. So queen b6 makes some sense, but also the move d takes e4 has been seen. But now after f takes e4, the situation in the center has completely changed. That's very important to understand, because now white has gotten a very nice pawn center. Those pawns, they are covering a lot of squares, preventing the black pieces from becoming so active. And by capturing on e4 and recapturing from white's perspective, the f3 square has become available for the knight. So of course there is also some drawback. First of all, you're voluntarily trading off your central pawn, but at the second time you're also allowing white to get a nice square for the knight. I believe that once you go for such a strategy, giving the pawn center to your opponent, there's a key rule, and that is that you have to challenge the pawn center. For example, there are many other openings where you voluntarily give up the pawn center to your opponent. Take, for instance, the Grunfeld opening. But the Grunfeld opening, white is occupying the center. What black is doing? Black is trying to challenge the center in order to get counterplay against those pawns, but also to generate new squares for his own pieces. We have a similar situation here in this Caro-Kann line. I believe that black has to challenge the pawn center, and the best way to do so is the move e5. I believe this is just an absolutely a key move, just to fight for squares in the center. You never have to be afraid of a move like d takes e5, because that would run into queen h4 check. So this is a key idea. Of course, g3 will be met by queen takes e4, so some very simple tactic. But in general, it's not only about this tactical idea with queen h4, which is in the air now. It's also that you're just opening the path for your bishop to be developed. Once your bishop is getting developed, the knight will be developed, of course. You can castle kingside. So by getting those two pawns in front of your queen and king, once you get them out, it's also just with the intention of speeding up the development. I believe e5 is a key move. You don't have to be afraid of d5, which would create a passed pawn. The pawn is not running that hard. And, well, of course, we had idea already of playing queen h4, which is, of course, kind of crushing. But from a general perspective, I would also like to mention that after this move d5, black can also try to punish white from weakening the dark squares, getting this bishop out to c5. And that is a kind of positional punishment. But queen h4 is, of course, the move which has to be played in order to prove the pawn weakness on e4. So e5 is a key move. Let's see what happened in the game. Because in the game, the black player has a rating of 1900, just goes for the move knight f6, which is a developing move. You're attacking the pawn on e4, but it also invites white to use the pawn center. You can actually just go forward with the knight. Of course, this is always a very sensitive topic, whether you should advance or not. I understand that once you push your pawn, you could also weaken the d5 square. But let's say you go now with a knight to d5. In fact, it looks like more like a Aljechin opening, where the knight is coming to d5, but black is no longer really able to challenge the center, and in fact the knight is going to be challenged now. White will play a move like c4, the knight will go to b6 for instance, and now white has just a very massive pawn center. That's what I like a lot. I would recommend you to play the move knight c3, and black is in some sort of trouble, because white will just continue developing with moves like bishop e3, knight f3, bishop e2, castle kingside for instance. Fantastic position. You have already semi-open f-file, so you have all the ingredients there just for building up a powerful attack. It all starts with a very nice solid foundation of occupying the pawn center. Unfortunately, my student didn't go for this move e5, but I believe that would have been just a key idea in order to gain a very nice advantage out of the opening. Elina went for the move knight c3, which I cannot really blame her, but I believe you're not really sensing the momentum. Knight c3 is not a bad move because you develop a piece, but once again, you're enabling your opponent to repair his mistake from the last move, and the move e5 should and could have been played again. e5 is a great move. Now after d takes e5, of course no longer you don't have this trick with queen h4 because the knight is obstructing the route for the queen, but if you take on d1, trading of queens, white has to recapture in one way or another. I don't really know how to recapture. Probably with the king, because if you take with the knight, pawn on e4 is hanging as well. But also in this case, after capturing on d1 with the king, there is a move like knight g4. Those pawns, they are just vulnerable. White's pawn center is just collapsing. There's also a threat of knight f2. Very nice, simple play, and it's all because black challenges the pawn center. Didn't happen. Black went for the move bishop to g4. Of course, developing a piece with gain of time, but it neglects challenging the center. White plays knight f3, good move, just getting the knight out, and black goes for the move e6. So this is a very modest setup. It has been seen in various openings. you put the pawns on the light squares, and before you do that, you bring your bishop, your light squared bishop out, so that the bishop will not be hindered on c8. If the bishop would be on c8, then of course you will have some issues getting your queenside developed. That's something you will get to see in the interactive section as well. So after e6, again, I believe white should try to gain space. Gaining space is a very important aspect, which we are going to talk about later as well. But once you're grabbing space, you just ensure that the opponent's pieces, they are driven back. Now, after the move e5, the knight is actually able again to go to the d5 square, but the point is that you bring your knight to e4. I believe the knight on e4 is doing very well, and the key idea is that with this pawn on e5, you also have nice ideas of building up an attack. I like to get my bishop out to d3, for instance. I like to castle kingside very quickly. At some point, I can even consider playing moves like c4, or even after that, the move c5. And then I see a nice hole on d6 where my knight can jump to. Of course, the knight can be taken, but then white will get a very nice protected passed pawn. So there are a lot of problems for black to be solved, but thanks to the space advantage, there's easier development, free development for white. So a lot of missed opportunities. After bishop e3, black went for the move queen to b6, but I would like to recommend that there's the move bishop b4, and I think bishop b4 is a developing move and at the same time provokes white to make a decision with his with the pawn on e4 thanks to the pin. After queen b6, I believe that white's next move is nice, although it's not the best in my opinion. The move a3 is of course directed against the idea that after queen takes b2 you can play knight a4 and no longer the b4 square is available. So this is a clearly nice example of a poisoned pawn. We get to talk about that more later soon as well. So that's not possible. However, instead of the move a3, I would just recommend the move queen d2. I believe this is more a move which contributes to white's development, even considering just to castle queenside. Of course, if you take on b2, I will go rook b1, and after that pawn on b7 will be hanging. That is not really nice for black, especially since most of the pieces are still on their initial squares. But let's see the game. After a3, there followed knight bd7. White goes bishop c4, still pawn on b2 cannot be taken. And also here, I'm very surprised by black's next move. Very instructive mistake, in my opinion. Black took on f3, and of course the point is that you cannot recapture with the queen, because then actually black will take on b2, and now both the knight and the rook are hanging. White has to play king d2 in order to avoid the loss of material, but this is clearly not what you would like to do. So white has to recapture with his pawn on f3, but that's not a bad thing, because in fact you're strengthening the center. You also prevent anytime ideas of knight g4. So in fact I believe this is a way of strengthening white's pawn center. And of course it also weakens the king side, but black doesn't have any pieces which are able to exploit the vulnerable parts on the king side. So in general, I don't see the idea of taking on f3, releasing the tension too early. I believe that the pin on this knight is kind of unpleasant, and let white just make moves like h3 in order to resolve the pin. Instructive mistake in my opinion. After g takes f3, black decided to castle queenside. Of course, bishop e7 and castling kingside was also an option. But once again, I believe that white should just go for something like queen d2 and castle queenside. I believe that makes a lot of sense. So castle queenside, and here white castles kingside. That's an interesting move. The engine mentions that there's the move b4, and Okay, this is not that easy to see. It's usually not the kind of move I like to make, because I believe you first have to complete development and bring your king into safety. But here it's directed against ideas related to the move c5, so you're guarding the c5 square a bit extra. Crucial moment, after castling kingside, I believe that black made another mistake, because now black has castled queenside, the queen is on b6, and black suddenly starts going for an attack with a move like g5. I believe that the chances of having a successful attack are close to zero. I don't really see this gonna work out well. Just want to point out what happened in the game. They followed the move queen d2, normal move. Black goes g4, trying to open the position, but it doesn't really make sense to open a position when your pieces are not that well placed. White goes e5, very nice move, challenging the knight on f6. There's actually kind of a tricky line with knight takes e5, which leads to some complicated stuff. But in fact, things are not even that clear. After, let's say, g takes f3, there's rook g8, bishop c5 coming up, c2 is hanging. So things are still a little bit tricky in this case. However, this was not played. In the game, knight d5 was played. And after bishop takes d5, c takes d5, white just took the pawn on g4, rook g8 tried to make use of the g file, but after h3, h5, white went g5, just keeping the files closed. And now after rook g7, protecting the pawn on f7, of course, white could just have solidified her position with the move h4, just locking up the position on the king side once again. There are no good pawn breaks on that side in order to prove that the king is vulnerable. Next, white should just consider playing a move maybe like b4, protecting the pawn. Double rooks on the f-file, play with all your pieces. The opening stage has been completed, and that's how you should play the game afterwards. White is close to be winning here with an extra pawn. But just one extra remark. I would like to say that the move g5 doesn't make too much sense. But what makes sense here is in fact to challenge the center. It's a recurring theme, not only in this game, but in every game you play. You cannot allow your opponent just to get such a nice center. It gives more possibilities later on. I believe that black should have played a move like c5, just in order to get the bishop soon out, or after the pawn moves from d4, you get the e5 square available. That's something which makes sense. Even the engine recommends a move like e5, which I believe for a human is harder to make, because you're likely to drop your pawn on f7. But after giving up the pawn on f7, you have ideas to take on d4, get a bishop out to c5. Even if that would cost a pawn, you get an open position to fight against white's exposed king. So I believe a lot of missed opportunities by both players in this example. That's why I like to cover it to illustrate the importance of the pawn center. But in the future videos, in the next videos, we will actually get to see that in every game the center really matters. And that's what you get to test later in the interactive section as well. So keep always in mind that whenever you start a game, try to fight for the control over the center, develop your pieces, bring your king into safety, and only then you can attack. If you start attacking immediately without fully completing your development or battling the center, yeah, the chances of having a successful game are close to zero. So nice game, lot of instructive mistakes, especially for amateur players. I believe this is what you should master better in order to be a good player.